Hey guys, I'm Brian. Welcome to my channel. So, based on the epic $700 gaming computer I did, I've had a few people ask me to show how I overclocked it. I didn't want to include this in the build because I thought it would take too much time or add too much time to the video, so I decided to do a separate video just on overclocking. Now, this is by no means an enthusiast board. So that means I'm not going to get any fantastic overclocking, but I did manage to get a lot higher than the stock speeds that you normally would see. I also managed to take this computer far beyond anything you'd see inside of a console. With that being said, if you do need to see something more on the sides of an enthusiast board, I can do an overclocking video based on the setup I have for myself. Either way, they're both ASUS decks, so I don't know if that's going to help everyone because ASUS has some AI suite, and I don't know if Gigabyte or MSI or ASRock or any of the other guys use anything like that. And AI suite actually helps you cheat with your overclocking because you don't have to reboot every single time. You can just test a clock, find out if it's stable, and then when you're done, change it in the BIOS. So if you want to see how I overclock this beast, pay attention to Chanley Style. Now, there are a few different ways to overclock. This was the way I did it. I feel like it's kind of a cheesy way to do it, but it gets the job done. You got your AMD Catalyst controller, and then the AI suite that's built into the motherboard. If you need a quick rundown of what I'm using to bench test, go ahead and just click in this general area. It'll send you over to the first video that I did for the build, and it gives you a breakdown of all the parts. The CPU is the most important part when it comes to overclocking your computer because it feeds the rest of the system. So make sure to start with the CPU first and then work your way down. So this is all your VRAM and stuff, and since this motherboard is not really designed for mass amounts of overclocking, you pretty much have to max out all the settings to barely break even. So what I did is I maxed out the CPU load calibration, CPU current capacity, CPU power phase, which is basically how fast it adjusts to the load you throw at it, CPU load line calibration, CPU current capacity, and CPU voltage frequency. So basically the frequency can be higher, the communication between the processor and the RAM is up, the amount of load the actual CPU can handle is higher. The VRAM to CPU power is adjusted to higher capacities, and the load line is calibrated to a higher capacity. And then you click apply. This is not permanent. I will show you how to make this more permanent in the BIOS later. So then you come back over here, and I looked it up online. A lot of people were getting 4.3. So I started out there and I worked my way backwards. Yes, 4.3 was stable, it ran, but as soon as I tried to basically put it under load or I would bench test it, I actually got worse scores because the V-cores on this motherboard could not keep up with the actual load that the processor was putting out. So 4.1 was the best scores I got. I actually got better scores at 4.1 than I did at any other overclock. And then you click apply. Yes. It should show up over here what the clock. There it is right there. Boom. There's the clock. So once you got that all plugged in, you can test it. For the overclock on the CPU, I use performance test, which is actually just Passmark, and I use Prime 95. One other thing you can do to try to test out your performance is you come over here to performance, you go to CPU overdrive, you can click override existing CPU settings, and then you click auto tune, and the AMD software will actually go through clock by clock until the computer fails, and it will save the best, most stable clock. This actually recommended 4.3 as well, but like I said, I couldn't get as good of result because the VRAM power from the motherboard could not keep up with what the CPU could actually do. I'm sure the CPU could handle going much higher if it were in a better board that was designed for overclocking, but this is really just a low-end, very nice, not totally crappy, but completely piece of shit motherboard. Thanks, ASUS. Always putting out the quality we expect. But then you'd hit apply and you could run all that. Anyway, I'm not actually going to do that. I've already done it before. No need in crashing the computer more times than you need. So once you have your overclock set, it's not going to be the same as mine. It could be better, it could be worse. It all depends on the equipment you get. Once you have it locked in, though, go ahead and restart the computer and get ready to start mashing delete or F2 or whatever it is. Pretty sure it's actually both. So, alright, now once the BIOS pull up, I'm going to go up to, oh, there it is, the advanced mode. Click advanced mode. Then you're going to go to AI tweaker. And this is where you plug it in. You can do your overclocking here, and if the overclock is bad, it just won't take. So you'll pick your bad overclock, like if you put it at 4.3, it won't take it. You pick your bad overclock, it'll boot up, but it'll be the normal clock that you have stock. It just won't take it, which is kind of a nice feature, but at the same time it's frustrating. Then you come down here, and these are all the things I told you about before, like the CPU load calibration extreme, CPU/NB load line calibration extreme, CPU current capacity 130%, all the way down, boom, boom, boom. There's everything that you need for that. So once you actually have that all programmed in, once everything's good to go, you hit F10 or exit, and then you hit save changes and restart. Yes, obviously mine didn't change, so it's not going to, but it'll give you a list of stuff that's going to change. So it happens when you have two computers hooked up to one monitor. And there's the computer booted up, ready to go. Now for the actual graphics card, I could have used the Gigabyte Overclock Guru 2 that came with the CD, but actually that thing was pretty much garbage. I'm disappointed in you, Gigabyte. You used to be so much better back in like the early 2000s. But yeah, the Guru sucked. It didn't have a voltage controller. It didn't have a fan controller. It was basically just like turn up the overclock, turn up the VRAM, good luck, and it sucked. I could not get anything worth even saving as an overclock. So what I did is I came over here to the Catalyst controller, clicked on Graphics Overdrive, and pretty much there it is right here. You got your power limiter, which I maxed out, the overclock setting right there, and then you got your VRAM. Also, when I was doing testing, I enabled fan control and turned it up to 100 just so that I'd have the max amount of cooling over the graphics card. But once you've got it plugged in, you don't really need it to be turned up all the time. It'll clock itself up, and the fan will turn up higher as the temperatures go up. But basically, what I did is in increments of 0.5%. So like 16 is too much. So I clocked it back to 15.5. Still a little too much, so I went one more, perfectly stable. And then same thing, once you get the GPU overclocked, then you come over to the VRAM and you basically do the same thing. Bring it up until the graphics can't handle it, restart the computer, and then slowly clock it back until you get a valid overclock. One thing I did is I looked them up on the internet, see what other people got to give me basically a starting block. And once I had that, I knew where to start and where my parameters were going to be. Shoot for higher, but couldn't create anything even near it, so just stick with what was stable. I want to talk about my benchmarks a little bit differently than the way most people do, because honestly, this stuff's important to me. I don't know why no one else doesn't talk about it, and I've started to see a trend where people are starting to, but I feel like I came up with the idea first. I just waited too long. Anyway, the way my benchmarks are going to work, I'm going to talk about the programs, the watts they used. I'm going to talk about them in 720p, 1080p, and 1080p overclocked. And the reason I want to talk about the difference between 720p and 1080p is because your Xbox and your PlayStation 3, most of the Xbox One games are in 720p, and most of your PlayStation games are actually in 900p. So they're not even really running at full 1080p HD. And there's a pretty noticeable difference. And since the computer I built runs at 1080p when it's overclocked, I figured those are valid reasons why I should talk about them and show the differences. So here's my results. Starting off with Passmark, it ran at about 200 watts by average, and it maxed out around 314 watts. At 720p, the baseline score was 2222.2. At 1080, it dropped down to 1811, which was a loss of 18.4%. Once I overclocked it and put it at 1080p, it went up 38.8%. Passmark is an overall evaluation of your PC and will give you a good comparison of your components to other components that have been tested through Passmark. ValleyBench was a little troublesome. It would only run the native monitor's resolution, so the 720p is actually 1024p. Something a little higher, but still gives a decent comparison. The average watts for ValleyBench was 275 watts, while the maximum was 343. The score at 720p was 2173. When the resolution was bumped up to 1080p, the score went down 38% to 1347. Once overclocked, the loss was not reclaimed. The score only went up 32.8%, up to 1789, even though the frame rates were very similar. As a joke, I bumped the settings up to Ultra, but I was pleasantly surprised. The performance only went down 15%, and it was still quote-unquote in the playable range. After that, I had to see what this computer could do, so I completely maxed out the settings to Extreme HD, and it bombed. It went down 41.5% and was completely unplayable. I wouldn't recommend Ultra or Extreme HD for this computer. 3D Mark used an average of 325 watts with a maximum of 342 watts. 3D Mark isn't your average bench software. It actually uses 3 separate tests to evaluate your PC. First, you have Firestrike. It's a DirectX 11 bench designed with high-end gaming PCs in mind. It uses high graphics rendering detail and complexity, which is actually set higher than most benchmarks or even actual games you'll play. The second is CloudGate. It uses 2 graphics tests and 1 physics test to evaluate your PC. It also uses the DirectX 11 engine, but it's set down to level 10 to test the DirectX 10 performance only on Windows computers. And then the third is Ice Storm. It uses 720p graphics performance to test your overall system. It also uses 1 physics stress test for your CPU performance. It also uses the DirectX 11 engine, but set to level 9, so that way it can test your DirectX 9 compatibility of your computer and performance. Firestrike at 720p started at 3437 and went down less than 1% when switched to 1080p, the final result being a 10.4% increase. CloudGate was a different story. Starting at 720p, the score was 9053. It went up 2% when switched to 1080p, and went up another 9.6% when overclocked. CloudGate had the strangest results. At 720p, it started at 69,961, going down 10.6% when switched to 1080p, and then finally going back up 22% when overclocked. The strange results from Ice Storm are explainable. It's designed to test graphics at 720p. So when you switch it to 1080, of course it's going to go way down. The overclock compensated for that and brought it back up. The final thing I tested this computer with was Battlefield 4. Unfortunately, I had issues with trying to get screenshots and screen captures and things like that. I don't know if it was Windows 8 or if it's just operator error. I'm kind of new to Windows 8. Half the time my screenshots were just white, and the other time they just didn't come through at all. So I'm just going to read you off the results. So for Battlefield 4, the average watts used was 206, and it maxed out around 284 watts. At 720p, I could get settings at Ultra between 27 FPS and 36. It was playable, but as soon as you started getting shot at, it was really hard to play. If you get what I'm saying, like it didn't respond well. When I switched the graphics down at 720p to just high, it was better. It would be between 38 and 45 FPS. That's stock, not bad. Definitely better than PlayStation 4 and Xbox. Like I said, Xbox uses 720p at low settings, and PlayStation is 900p but with tessellation. So it's not that much better. Anyway, at 1080p, set to high, only got 33 FPS with a high around 39. That's understandable. It's still at high settings. You went from 720 to 1080. You're using a lot more of your resources. Now, when it was at 1080 overclocked at high, that's when it used the maximum watts. It was at 284 watts, and actually I saw highs around 59 FPS, but it hovered around 36 on the low end. Definitely playable. I had fun, but just to get a decent comparison, at 1080p overclocked at low settings, basically the same settings consoles use, it was anywhere between 50 and 102 FPS. This computer killed consoles. There was a method to my madness. There it is right there. $700, beat the shit out of a console, have way more options, PC, better, not as convenient, but better. That's the end result. Alright, well, thanks for coming to check out my overclocking guide. I know it was more like a benchmark results. Did not like overclocking this computer very much, but I needed to show the results that I got for it. Anyway, if you look down below in the description, there will be the 3 videos that are connected to this PC over here. And don't forget to subscribe, like this if you liked it. Go ahead and hit thumbs down if you don't. But if you hit thumbs down, tell me why you didn't like it. I will improve. I really do. Don't forget, if you want to be more interactive, follow me on Twitter and Twitch. And, yeah. Thanks for checking out Chanley Style.